Welcome to Project Insight's Professional Development Series. Today's session, Trust But Verify, Knowing Enough to Keep Your Projects on Track, focuses on one of the toughest balancing acts in project management, trusting your team while still verifying that the schedule is accurate, realistic, and moving in the right direction. Keeping projects on schedule isn't about micromanaging, it's about knowing what to look for before dates slip, risks intensify, or priorities shift. A few housekeeping notes. Everyone will be on mute. Please feel free to ask questions or use the chat as you may need to throughout the tutorial here. This is valid for one PDU certificate. They will be mailed to you by the end of the week. The trick is you need to attend the full session to get the QR code. This link that you're joining from will also remain active, so that way you can come back and rewatch this session if you wish. We are joined today by Steve West, the CTO and co-founder at Project Insight. Steve and Project Insight have helped thousands of businesses find a complete picture of their organization-wide work. With Steve is Diane Buckley-Alwies. She's the founder of Core Performance Concepts and brings decades of experience improving operational efficiency through project and program management best practices. Steve and Diane, you guys ready to get started?
Yep, thank you.
Awesome.
Oh, welcome everybody, and our last session before the end of the year. So I hope everybody has a wonderful holiday season. So what we're going to talk about today is, as we said, we want to trust but verify. Project management is difficult. There's always things that go wrong because there's always going to be differences in projects. And one of the things that we always have to kind of come back to is saying projects are all different. Even if you have repetitive processes, repetitive types of projects, there's always going to be something that's different. There's going to be a situation that's different. There's going to be a client that's different. There's going to be people that are different. There's going to be somebody gets sick. You can't always predict that. So you really have to think through your project early on to know how to best manage it. And trust but verify, to me, means that I can put a plan in place. I can let the team execute on that plan, but I know that there's key things that I can do to alert me when I need to really pay attention more. And so that's kind of what we're going to be talking about here today. And we're going to kind of cover these six topics about knowing the end game, evaluating risks, and looking at metrics, and how do you respond to changes that happen in your project. So Steve, right? How many projects have done exactly the same thing?
Like none.
None. Exactly. There's always something interesting that happens, and we have to be prepared for it. And the challenge is there are project managers that feel they have to be involved in everything. And that's not, that's more that micromanaging. So this is the importance of having a plan. So when we talk about having a plan, we want to understand what the end game is. And it doesn't mean that I'm the only person that knows this. We want to make sure that our team knows what are our goals, what's the outcome of the projects. And it's not necessarily the traditional time, scope, and cost. You could have projects that are critical to maybe a new product that's getting launched that you want to put out there that's going to help your organization gain market share. And cost may not be an issue, but time is an issue. But you also want to make sure you're getting to that market share, that you're validating that along the way. You might have a new feature that that this is the first round of that new feature. It's your MVP, your minimum viable product. So it means that you don't have to do everything. Quality doesn't necessarily have to be perfect. So understanding all that early on is crucial, and putting together a schedule that identify those deliverables, identify the dependencies and actionable steps, and looking at your resources will help you put a plan in place that the team should be able to execute on, and you're just being notified when things are going awry.
That's the ideal.
That is the ideal. But planning takes time, right?
Yeah.
And with iterative type of approaches, that we're all dealing with, those hybrid approaches, you still need to plan, You just may be doing it in shorter durations, shorter.
I think people don't put enough time into to planning out the schedules because you're just in such a hurry to get started that you just go right into it, and then you get behind on you just get behind on that part of it.
Yeah, and what other things can go wrong if you don't take the time to plan?
Well, you're usually incorrect and
You miss
you get
things.
behind right away,
Yep.
because you
You know.
didn't think it through.
Yep.
And then you obviously miscommunicating to the management, miscommunicating to your customer. Those are things that go wrong when you don't have the right steps in place up front.
Right. So we are a huge advocate of to put some planning thought in, and it should be the majority of the project manager's role, right? If you find
Mhm.
yourself having to check on everybody's work all the time and managing the minutia of the project, then you're probably not doing enough planning.
Yeah, and this is where getting people involved in the collaborative process can help you,
Mhm.
right? By if the team members are participating as far as marking things done and the tools that you're using, then that can really speed things up and can give you the time to do the planning.
Right, right. And then, think about the situation. And I think, Matt, you're going to show some stuff, but think about the situation where you've got an organization with, 10 projects going on simultaneously. And all of a sudden there's this new one, right? And it ends up being an important new one, right? So you know that resources are going to get shuffled around probably, you know, target dates are going to get shuffled around probably, so understanding the importance of the project, those goals, those outcomes, so that you can put a decent plan together. Too often I see, companies just say, oh, well, this is the most important project, so everybody's, stop what you're doing and work on this. Well, what happens to all those other ones? And then are your resources being, inappropriately utilized? So that's, again, we're at nauseum about the planning. So I'm going to let Matt take it from here.
I'm going to beat it a little bit further because it is so important, right? It's the idea that, I may get that pressure from somebody that says execute on this, but maybe they don't even understand what that means in the greater picture of what else we have working on. So that's why the idea of making sure that you have plan in play so that way you can communicate that appropriately goes there. So within Project Insight, we have a full the full ability to plan out your project. That can be waterfall, that can be hybrid, that can be agile specifically. We're looking at a project plan here where I've basically said that, hey, this project's going to begin in January of 2026. It's going to go through the life cycle that we've defined out, whether that's a template, AI generated, or I've come in here and go line by line to say we're going to do this or that, or I've imported that. And then ultimately we're going to go ahead and finish out, 6 months later. The trick to all of this is this work that we want to do is something that we're slating into work that we already have in play. So what I've done here is I've clicked onto a resource allocation report within our platform. This is where I have this rolled up by everybody, but then I can roll these down into the department heads. I can roll these, the department types, the resource types that we have in play to understand, when we can take on the work based on the bandwidth that my team already, has in play. So in that way, if I might need to push something out, I can do so. If I might need to bring it in, I can do that as well. Within Project Insight, we do have the ability to show active or projects that have been committed to or inactive projects, right? Work that we think we would like to do, such as that project plan we were just showing a moment ago, where then I can come in here and decide, if I bring that project on, I'm going to start using resources and I can show what the capacity for those resources will be with that potential work that we're going to have in play. So I can already say, hey, some of my team's a little bit over, right? We've got 40 hours of capacity. I'm at 51 work hours here for Christopher. But then as we bring on more work, what will that look like as a whole? The other part that's really handy, and we're going to actually do a full power tutorial on this next week, is the idea that we'll have simulation or what if planning in play here. So what if I use this option or variant on this project plan? What will that do to my capacity or budget? What if I use this? What if we don't start it in January? What if we start it in March instead, right? So in that way, I can decide when the best place is for this work, so that way I could kind of do that set it part and then let it go, right? I don't need to be in the minutia of every single task that is occurring from member to member. I can say, hey, I know that you have the bandwidth because we've understand the overarching organization allocation, so go ahead and run with this work as a
And
whole.
it's really important that, especially as new tools and technology, AI, come into play, that the project manager is spending time looking at those what ifs, because you don't want to. I mean, I'm old school, right? So, I was around when you had the Microsoft project and you push the button to level everything and it just blew everything up, and that still can happen, right?
Yeah.
So it still can happen. So it's, again, I'm trying to get the project manager saying, I'm not going to be working in the minutia of every little detail in the project. Get the plan in place, give it to your team, and then you're managing at the higher level and making sure it stays on track. And especially when you talk about resources is one of those areas that I've seen many times, and this is where you have to make a judgment call. Somebody might be in the middle of something. Let's look at your Christopher that has a little over allocated. Somebody might be in
Yep.
the middle of something, and now you're thinking about switching things out. Well, what does that do to his workload, right? Should he finish what he's doing, or should he drop everything and start on this? And that is a individual integrate and assessment that needs to be made.
Well, and sometimes it's even the idea that I need to tell my executives or whoever is asking me to slate this new work in to say, this is what it's going to do, right? We
Right.
can do this scenario, but if so, it's going to cause delays over here, or our budget's going to increase immensely because Christopher is going to need overtime for that extra 14 hours a week, right? That we're asking him to work there. So
Yeah.
absolutely.
Exactly.
And one thing to remember too, like I think a lot of times when we have new customers come in and you put your plans in, sometimes people get hung up on the wanting it to be super accurate. But even just like getting marginally close as far as what your WBS or your work schedule should be, that'll help you. And also to remember to always include not just how long in duration it takes, but the effort as well that is required. So, and if you do that, Project Insight will just automatically calculate the capacity for you.
One other piece I think that's important on that, Steve, is even if I'm maybe not that granular as I look to a tool like ours, I can do our top-down allocation planning and not even get granular on any task. Just say, hey, I need Diane to be on this project for this amount of time, or I need somebody else to be on. I can go right here into my top-down planning mode and just say, hey, this project begins this day, it ends here. During that time, 10 hours per week, without getting into the weeds as to what anybody's doing.
Right, and that's what a lot of people spend a lot of time on, spreadsheets. This particular screen ends up looking like a spreadsheet, but you can just say, okay, it's going to take 10 hours by a person or even the role. You can do that. But getting back to even just and this is great for like what you're saying when we're roughing it out, like this might happen. But then when you're actually doing or executing a project and you have the tasks and people are collaborating, don't get hung up. Like their advice is don't get hung up on being perfect.
Right.
Because a lot of times people think, oh, I don't really know how long that takes. Well, it's generally going to take, a day or 5 days, 10 days. When I say 10 days in terms of duration, but then whether they're working the whole day or not, so it could take 5 days, but it's really only 8 hours of work. Just putting something in there that's close gets you really far. And I always advise that because that you'll get that capacity report will then give you an idea of how busy you are. That's relatively accurate.
Yeah, and we've talked about this in other times. It's like, and if you don't, you don't have the history to look back on to learn.
Well, and also you have nothing. If you don't put the schedule together, it'll be for sure chaos. So if you do some scheduling, it's going to be reduction of chaos.
I like the note. Whoever said not being perfect is our
Yeah,
focus.
yeah, that
But
was
we're
good.
all
Yeah.
perfect, right? We're just all perfect. No, but well, again, to your point, Steve, there's absolute value in putting something down and then having the ability to have a feedback loop and learn from it,
Hmm.
right? Because you'll get better at it. So but if you don't ever put anything in there, you don't ever put any estimates of effort in there, you're never going to know.
Yeah, but
So
for scheduling and building a full work breakdown structure can be intimidating to some
mhm,
PMs or people who aren't professional PMs, meaning they haven't been trained in it or anything, but they find themselves having to manage projects, which
mhm.
most project managers just land into it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's talk about risks now. So we talked about our planning. Now, part of that planning is knowing about the high priority risks. You should all be doing some level of risk assessment. You probably have, you're doing similar projects, you have similar type of risks. You probably have actions for some of those higher priority risks that you would execute on if those risks are triggered. So again, the project manager should be focused on the things that get triggered. You should know the things that are the lower priority risks and let the team, manage those if those happen. But if the higher priority risks, that's when you really need to be involved because those are the things that are going to have the highest impact to the success of the project. So within Project Insight, we can also capture those risks and those action plans if they do occur. But there's also going to be new risks potentially that come in as well. So I would say that the project manager should spend most of their time, as it relates to risks, on ensuring that the highest probability risks with the highest impact have a plan to execute on, and to be conscious of maybe some new risks that might be coming in that need to be planned within the project. For example, all of a sudden your key resource, has God forbid, a death in the family and is going to be gone for 3 months. That's not necessarily one you were expecting. You might have had, vacation time risks, which was a lower priority, but a 3-month hiatus could be extremely detrimental. Those are the things you need to jump on.
Especially for my 4 month long project, right, Diane? As far as
That's
that's
right.
concerned, right? I'm going to be sweating that one out as far as that's concerned.
You're
And
going to start
condolences,
coding.
but right, exactly.
That would be a dangerous thing. That would make it worse.
Right. And that's, to your points there, that's why we allow for risks to be templatized. So as I bring in and as I create the project, I can let those kind of baseline pieces come into play. As my project lives and breathes, I can give people the permission to associate risks to the tasks that they're on if I want to, or they can come here on the risk register as a whole and just say, "Hey, I've got something new that's popped up as far as that's concerned," right? New risk, and kind of then decide what that looks like. The other part to that, and this is configurable as far as what my matrix looks like, or honestly, even if I'm viewing that and I just want to see the chart or the data below, but you can then score against probability and severity, and then taking your advice there, Diane, is those ones that are really important I can mitigate, right? I can come in here and say, look, this is how we're going to fix it. If we do those steps, I'm going to reduce my risk to the organization, to the project, to my client by looking this way as opposed to where we had started out. So this is something where you can choose some or all of these features within Project Insight to deploy, but this does give me one central place where I'm managing my schedule and now I'm managing my risks as a whole as well. So
Yeah, and just
Agreed.
sitting down and looking at this is going to help you think about what they are. So if you, again, like we all know fundamentally what certain risks are, but just the act of writing them down or putting them into any kind of tool will help you spark more into that.
Yeah, a lot of times people don't want to talk about risks or spend
Yeah.
time on planning for them, because they're like, well, why? hopefully it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
However, things do happen,
Well,
right?
and you can flag those for what's going to show on a status report,
Mm-hmm.
or and then share them with, that's the other thing too, is having the risks identified is something that helps you manage your stakeholders above, your management
Absolutely.
and your customers. So you can say, well, these things could happen. If you're talking to them about it earlier, then at least you have a little more, when if something does happen, you can say, well, we communicated this, so it's not
Mm-hmm.
like some controversial thing
We're
down the
not
road.
we're not unaware. We were just hoping it wasn't, and we've taken some steps to mitigate it. But there's always going to be some residual risk out there potentially. So just being open to having those conversations on a regular basis, is truly important, and we should never be afraid to have those conversations.
Yeah, no, we just got a great comment from Julia about how Project Insight is great at showing shared ownership. So we appreciate the compliment. We
Yep.
try to make it work for you.
Yep. And then again, so we're going into the whole concept of trust but verify. So we've talked about making sure you have a plan. Ideally, you're not in the weeds on the plan. I'm not in the weeds of the execution of that plan. People need to know what they need to do. But now, and then you've got your risks that identify. But now it's like, okay, well, how do we measure success? Too often, and this is one of the reasons why agile kind of methods kind of came up, it was too often companies would get to the end of the project and then the clients would look at it and say, that's not what I wanted, literally,
Right.
Hmm.
because somewhere along the line, something went astray, and it happens all the time because people change, people get pulled into other things, people, get distracted, people think something's important when it's not. So it really is important to have clear sense of metrics. Now, your typical ones are your time, cost, and scope. And we've talked about, you don't need to measure 40 things, but know what those key metrics are for your project and for the success of your project, and build them within your plan as to when you can verify them. So, let's just use the expectation of quality. Quality takes more time, right?
Hmm.
So the longer, the more exact you want to be. We were just talking about our project schedules. The more exact you want to be, the longer it's going to take to create your schedule, right? um Same goes true with regard to the quality of your product. That if there's, let's just say there's 10 tasks that all contribute to the quality of the outcome. Not all 10 tasks contribute in equal weight, but all 10 tasks do. And if you do all 10, you're going to have the highest quality product, but maybe you don't have time to do all 10, right? Maybe you can do 2 of them and you get 70% of the way there, and the other 8 are really low impact to the quality of the project. So you can affect um, time by looking at these metrics and making conscious decisions about it. Again, what is done, is done when we're 100% perfect, or is done when we're 65% perfect, right? Those are the kinds of metrics and conversations you have to have, and you should be validating that throughout the project. Same, and these are just examples. I mean, I could have gone and put 400 different bullets here, but on a cost side, if this is something that has a very clear ROI, and we're going to spend $50,000 to get $200,000 benefit, then we should be tracking that budget to make sure we're not going to $100,000, because then your whole ROI is impacted. So what was the importance of that, of the initiation of the project? The assumption was going to cost $50,000. So as you're going along, tracking to that budget might be one of the most important metrics to look at. Um, Again, another one is, just team effectiveness. Are they delivering a good product, or are they um, have bad code? I mean, is somebody having to always do rework on them? Like what, all that stuff adds money. Or if you have to have the most experienced person on this, that adds to cost. So these are kinds of things that you should be checking. You could be checking, not you should be checking, could be checking, depends on your project. But those are more the traditional kinds of things. The more from a project management standpoint, from the traditional PMBOK, and where I think PMI is going is, which I've always believed in, you need to understand the goals of that project. Like, is it something that's meant to increase our market share? Is it something that's meant to add additional values, to retain clients? What is the more operational expectations of what you're doing, and can you put something in place within the project plan to monitor that? So let's just say it's something, let's just use our example of market share. Okay, this project is going to help us grow market share, but we've got to have it in place by November because the holiday season, we want to have it in place by the holiday season so that we can grow that market share. All right, great. Well, you got a time component, but you also want to make sure that throughout the project, you're validating, and maybe you're validating with your sales team. Maybe you're validating it with a third party, that's helping you with, market share improvements. How are you validating that? So don't always just look inside to your project. You might have some metrics that are necessary that need to go outside the project to another third party to be able to validate that you're tracking well, because you don't want to get to the end and somebody says this isn't good, right? And even iterative kind of cycles could fall into that trap, because even the whole agile methodology doesn't really talk about timelines, doesn't really, it does talk about quality, but again, what's quality? And are we delivering what's expected to the marketplace?
Well, and even with agile, there are expectations of delivering by a certain time for most projects. So, setting time aside to figure out what those metrics or goals are going to be and whether or not you're aligned totally makes sense. You may even want to, since we're talking about scheduling, you may even want to put milestones in the project to do those measurements and to make those assessments.
Absolutely. And
for yourself.
I think it's a great idea to pull the other stakeholders into the project at certain, you know, gates, to let them look at it and give you feedback, because then you can adjust and, evaluate. Because like I said, what you don't want to do is get to the end, and how many people, you can all raise your hand, how many people have been on a project where all of a sudden it was supposed to be 6 months and it ends up being 9 months or more.
Well,
We've all
sure.
had those horror stories, and most of the time that's because people didn't put gates in the early part of the project to stop people working on non-impactful tasks and focus them on working on the impactful tasks. And
That's always a hard one too. We've had a whole webinar on that.
Yes, yeah. So it's like, it is hard, and a lot of times people don't. I'll use that example of, you have 10 tasks and 2 of them get you 60% of the way there. Well, if everybody's working on the 8 that only get you 40% of the way there, you're not going to make it. You're not going to make it. So that's super important, to make sure it's clear as to which tasks have the greatest impact on the overall success of the project, and put those phase gates in there so that you can assess it.
Great. It's all really good advice there.
Yeah. It's like, we all have the black and blues to prove it.
Yeah, right.
It's like, but anyway, and then Matt, were you going to jump in here, or
No, I think we can go after this one as far as that's concerned.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we'll kind of smash those together. I think that works well.
Let's do some smash. All right. So, as I stated early on, it's really important to put some exception processing into your project planning. You cannot be effective project manager if you're going to get into the weeds on every single task. You've got to have a plan in place that people can execute on, but you should also have some indicators, some milestones, some validation steps that help you know that you're on track, or have you know that you're not. And that's when you need to come to action as a project manager.
Well, and I think you also mean by putting exception processing, should there also be some tasks just left for some extra labor in there for the things that do come up in the plan as
Oh, of
well on
course,
top
yeah.
of that?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
of course, we should always have some sort of contingency in there,
Hmm.
from a project manager standpoint. But I think it's more, when I say exception processing,
Yeah.
it's um, I don't need everybody on the project to tell me when they're done with their tasks, right? I think we were
Yeah.
talking about it earlier. Like, there could be a task that is important, and maybe those tasks I get notified on,
Hmm.
when those are done. So we make sure we're tracking on that. I mean, there's going to be tasks that are higher priority than others. Um, in theory, they're all necessary. But when you do start slipping, a project manager needs to make some assessment as which things are still necessary, right? And at that point, you have to make some harder decisions to say, well, maybe we don't work on these other things because we still want to make the objectives
Yeah.
and get attain those goals. So we might have had some, I don't want to call them extra, but additional steps that make it even a better deliverable. And you've got to make those business decisions.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree. I think, to your point, within Project Insight, we're on a project plan here, just to kind of walk through some of those different pieces that you've gone through. First of all, I can have my execution, right? I can go through I'm going to initiate and I'm going to plan, and then this is how we're actually going to get this work done. You can also have monitoring tasks within this project as a whole, where I can come in and say, hey, I'm going to do QA data collection 90 days after everything's done. I'll do it in regular intervals so that way I can understand, did we have the market impact that we looked at? Did we, achieve the desired results that we wanted as we go through that to make sure that everybody's happy? That can be one task like we're looking at here, right, where it's a 90-day duration. That can be a series of tasks that we do in reoccurrence if we care to. Or I can even have a separate project that links to this project that is just for QA specifically, right? Or that monitoring part of that. So you have a lot of different options with that. Steve had mentioned the idea of milestones, right? So I can right click and insert the milestones as a whole, and then I can understand, what of the work that I'm doing are those really important key pieces that we want to track. And maybe what Diane was mentioning, these are the ones that I'm going to monitor as the
Hmm.
PM. I don't need to know the in-betweens. I just need to make sure that these guys are executed on specifically,
Yeah, because
Yeah.
right?
if everything's ready for the milestone to be done, I mean, in theory, everybody should be working towards. Again, it could be at the end of a sprint. You know how you do your retrospective and your demos and things. I mean, it could
Right.
be that.
Hmm.
To where you're actually validating that you're delivering to the expectations.
Well, and if you're able to, fully use the tool where your team members are collaborating with you online, then they should be marking the other things off for you. And this is really key, I think, getting the whole entire organization. We have some clients where the PMs are able to get everybody involved and it works great because it saves the project manager time. And then there's some organizations we work with where they don't really, some of the people doing the labor might look at their work list, but they're not collaborating as much as they could. If you can encourage your team to collaborate with you, it'll actually save you more time to be able to do all these things we're talking about today.
And then you definitely don't need to feel like you're micromanaging, right, Steve?
Yeah.
Because I don't need to be looking over your shoulder to watch you coding, right? Because I know you're executing and marking things as done as you might need
Yeah.
to. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we have new features coming out too, that where you can, if you don't want to build a project plan, you can just ask the AI engine to make one for you. So those are some other ways to save time and get you a head start. And we're going to have a whole other webinar on that too, but there's things that can help make that speed up for you.
And I'm sitting here smiling because I'm sure there's people in the audience today are like, Oh, if I have to present to the stakeholders during the middle of this project, and they're going to want to add more stuff, you know, but that's where knowing the goals and the objectives come into play. And that's where, again, it's another one of our values as project managers is they're always going to ask for more.
Right.
Right? They're always going to ask for more. I don't think I've ever sat in a meeting demoing, a product, and they not have some idea for
Yeah.
some other feature, some other thing. But that doesn't mean that you do it, and you have to kind of, position it as like, let's just say you're 40% the way there on what's expected, and you're doing a demo and you're showing them that, and they come up with 14 different new ideas, and then you can have the
And that
conversation.
happens like all the time.
I know, that's what I'm saying. It's like, so one of the things you have to do, you have to be prepared for that. You have to know that that's going to happen. But what, is kind of question back. So you have these 14 things. Of these 14 things, which, if any, help us get further to the goal if we're only 40% of the way there, or not? That, so you have to have that conversation. And let's say maybe there is one in there, and remember I always said we had 10 items that help us get there. Well, maybe out of that conversation, it's decided that there's 2 new ones that would be better than 4 of these other ones that we have in the plan to do. I'd much rather make that change at that point in time with the client and saying, we agree that we're going to do these 2 tasks instead of these other 4 tasks, because that's going to get us to 90% there with less resources. We can do that in the next sprint, kind of thing. So those conversations need to be had. And if you don't know what your goals are, and you don't know how each task contributes to those goals, you're never going to have that conversation. And you're going to end up with way too much, and you're going to feel bad that you can't respond to the client, or you try to do everything that they ask, and you delay your project even more.
Well, let me introduce you to my charter here, Diane, as far as that's concerned, and say, I love your idea of what you want to do, but we did already document what we were planning on doing and executing on this project. So let's talk about, a phase 2, or what that next iteration is going to look like as far as that's concerned. The other part to note here is I can prioritize these tasks all the same way that I can identify, what are my milestones. So if I want to come in and have that conversation later on, if I am in need of that conversation where I can say, hey, we can drop off these low priority ones because those are the, 70%, bottom 70% kind of things. Great, let's put those in, or bottom 7%. I can slate in a little bit of, extra with that effort, but otherwise, the fact that I have this all documented right here, it makes it a lot easier for me to have those stakeholder meetings, whether they're executives or whether they're clients that we've said this is what we're going to execute on for you.
And even being able to add those 2 new ones and lower the priority of the other ones.
Yep.
And gain that agreement, right, while you're on the phone with them, or while you're in a meeting with them, is so powerful.
Yeah.
Because it just shows to them that you understand their problem and what they're trying to solve, and you're not just blindly executing on a plan without any feedback.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And as you are executing, to your other points that you had mentioned around, the idea of having those indicators kick on, having those, benchmarks in play, this is really where, Project Insight's bread and butter is, as far as being able to say, hey, we had planned for this much time, we're over that much time. We had planned for this many hours or this budget piece, and we're not doing so well on this. So in that way, again, the project manager doesn't need to be in the minutia of Steve's 1 task or 3 tasks. Although, to Steve's point, if they are executing it in here, I can get that granular and say, hey, every single time we do a project, I assign 10 hours to, person A, and they do 15 hours. Let's have that conversation around, how we can, better suit their work or give them the tools that they need to be on par with their peers, right? But all of that jumps out granularly either at the task level, or I can run into a project report and get those high level pieces on all of my projects as a whole. So then I can, really get a quick indicator of, what's not doing well automatically, and then which project managers should I have those conversations with as we go through those
Yeah.
pieces.
And
So,
and you can define what the parameters for how much are you behind schedule to be yellow or red in those auto indicators.
right. The other one is, that kind of the whole principle here, that those validation steps, that trust but verify in this is I can put phase gates on any of the work that's being completed as we go through. So in that way, I may say that I'm done, but now, Diane, you're my next step in line to make sure that validation works. And then after you approve that, then I want the project review team and then my product manager or whomever else that we want as a part of an approval process, which is what we're looking at here, to go through and kick those out. So we really can make sure that we're getting it done the right way.
Yeah,
So,
and the approval process is great because and I keep coming back to like exception processing.
right.
You know, if you spend time approving everything, you're probably spending too much time, right?
Yep.
But you want to make sure that the key things that are impacting those results are being reviewed as early as possible so you have time to respond. But you
Yeah.
don't need to do it on everything. I mean, even
Mm.
even operational stuff like forget technology stuff. You know, um, you know, let's just say like an insurance company that's processing applications, right? They don't need to review every single application. They only need to review the applications that have something that's unique that kicks it out as an exception.
Right.
Yeah.
So you let the technology or you let your system processing handle the things that are lower priority or lower complexity, because in theory, people know how to do that. They've been trained on it. So yeah, you could miss something, but it's probably not going to, break the
Hmm.
bank. But the ones that do have a little bit uniqueness that have, and it goes back to your risk, that have a higher impact, you want to make sure, somebody has eyes on that to, confirm that the decisions that were made are accurate and that you don't have to do any rework, because you always want to do rework early, right?
Right.
Right.
Many of us have learned that the longer you wait to do rework, exponentially the cost goes up. So this is the same concept: is create your plan, get to a point where um, you everybody knows what they need to do, and you know what the most important things are. Let them do their job and then monitor it. But if there's something that is an exception, you need to be aware of it and to address it ASAP. And that's where you can be most effective versus running around trying to verify everything. It's not efficient for you as a project manager. It's not efficient for your team.
Yeah, and getting back to the get your team members to help you with you know, you set them tasks onto them, get them to mark those done. Have when you're in your team meetings, just tell everybody, okay, let's get everybody's tasks up to date and have them do it right then at the very beginning of the meeting. Because if you get the team members involved and have them be marking things off in your project plan for you automatically, then you'll have a
Builds
lot of time.
habits. Builds habits, right?
Yeah,
Once
totally.
you get into a
And
habit of doing it, then you're okay. But it's hard to change habits,
yeah,
and implementing a technology like Project Insight, it's changing people's habits.
yeah, and we have a lot, like I said, we have clients where the team members are all into it and they do it great, and then we have some where they don't, the team members aren't as much into it, and it's up to the project manager to really engage them to help you get that done, so you're not having to do it yourself.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
The other
So
part,
go
really
ahead.
quick,
Go ahead.
not to cut you off, Diane, but the other part to that, Steve, is that's also why we've got integrations with other tools as well, right? If my dev
Yeah,
team's accustomed to working in DevOps or Jira, I'm going to let them execute in that. If my
yeah,
operation teams do their tickets in ServiceNow every single time, great, let them do that. Let's just sync the data over so that way you have that higher level visibility as to what we're looking at here, even where I can say, you know, hey, this is where we had planned to be, and this is where we actually have achieved. So as those exceptions come up, I know where to hone in and what to focus then on as the project manager or leader within my organization, right?
Mm-hmm.
The nice piece is though, if everybody's helping, row my ship, I don't have to do what a lot of project managers do, which is wrangle this sheet and this team and these meetings and all of that to get all of my data points. I can just have it all in one central location for what we're doing. So
That's right.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, I think we're, going to summarize, and we've been talking about this throughout, is, you can trust but verify as long as you've got good plans in place and that you've got triggers out, identified that help when something's going off. Your upper control limit, your lower control limit, all of our PMPs that have looked at this chart before, I shouldn't have to be involved in the things that are around that control limit, that middle line, but I darn well should be involved in if something pops up out of it. And then I can focus my time on that to get that back in line. So if we use the tools right, we can manage manage the chaos in the organization and keep your stress level down too. You have to build that trust within the organization. They need to know what they need to do. The lower priority items, let people do that. That should be part of normal operations, business as usual, whatever you want to call it, and focus on the things that are not.
Right. That's the key, knowing what to focus on. And thank you so much, Diane, for helping us identify those pieces, right? As far as that's concerned.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So
if there are any questions, yeah, feel free to use the chat. We are putting up the QR code as well. So grab your phone out and get that scanned. The PDUs will be emailed out before the week is done, so you'll get those so long as you filled that out. Thank you so much for joining. As Steve and I had mentioned, you can join us next week for the what if simulation power tutorial within Project Insight, where we'll go in greater depth as to how I can make variants in WBS, how I can even have AI, generate that variant for me and then run with that, and then slate the work in as it makes sense based on all of these points we talked about today. The priority, what the market share is, what the market's going to demand on what we get done, where those deliverables fall in with everything else. So we look forward to seeing you there as well. Our Wear Your Cape to Work podcast wrapped up season 2 not too long ago. Season 3 will be out here next year. We look forward to having you join. If you're looking for something great to listen to over the holidays, this is a good one. Get some inspiration from amazing project managers who do everything from global logistics with Amazon to making sure that people have drinking water that's sustainable, led by their community as a whole in parts of the world that need assistance with that. So Steve, Diane, thank you so much for a wonderful year of tutorials again, or PDUs this year. Do also like Project Insight on social media, please.
And we'll have a whole new series next year.
Yep.
So looking forward to it. Happy New Year, everybody.
Yep. Thanks everybody for joining.